Hello, this is F2 Fan 5000 here with the Austrian round of the 2026 Formula 2 Championship, and it was amazing. So first thing I want to talk about how good the racing was this weekend in F2 and F3 was just scintillating, and I think what we have to respect here, sometimes we frame drivers in F2 about how they're going to end up in Formula One, but sometimes I feel as though we're reaching a point, and I know a lot of people might disagree with this, but or most people watching this would disagree, but I feel as though we're reaching a point where we have to appreciate drivers in F2 not for their ability to put themselves on the F1 radar, but for what they do in F2. We really have to appreciate that. And it almost sounds sad, but I think it's also a happy thing if you think about it in a different way, that it's possible that we're watching a generation of drivers so good, and there are drivers that won't be making Formula One who intrinsically are among the best drivers who have ever come along. And that sounds highly unlikely, but I don't want to go too much into it, but as you can see, for example, in some of the F1 teams, the young rookie drivers are coming in and they're performing at a very high level straight away against much more highly rated teammates. Kimi Antonelli is one, for example, Bortoletto against Hulkenberg, and I wasn't so sure about Paul Aron, but then when I saw his FP1 in Spain, and, I was convinced, like, this driver over a lap, maybe not so much his wheel-to-wheel racing, but over a lap, I think Paul Aron could be, one of the best qualifiers. And, of course, wheel-to-wheel racing can be improved upon. And I think the 2026 Formula 2 field, when I see the quality of the racing that we saw this weekend in Spielberg, I was spellbound, if I'm being honest. Spellbound. The close wheel-to-wheel racing. If you think about 5, 6, 7 years ago in Formula 2 at a track like this, there would have been several safety cars, crashes, people dive bombing, all this unnecessary stuff. And now, even in the midfield, that they're keeping it clean. They're keeping the racing clean. They're pulling off fantastic overtakes, and the level is really, really high. And as I said, it's possible we're seeing some drivers now that are some of the best drivers that we've ever seen in the history of this sport, even if they don't make F1, and we have to appreciate them while we have them. And there's one driver, no prizes for guessing, who I'm going to defend and praise vigorously for the way he drove, especially the way his on-track defence. But we'll get to that. I'm going to start now with the driver ratings, but also wanted to praise the circuit, Spielberg, fantastic circuit for racing. So starting with Trident, Rafael Camara gets an 8.5. He's actually had a very good weekend. It's just that he's been outshone by a couple of other drivers. I felt bad for him because in the qualifying session, I feel as though his track placement wasn't good. Every time we cut to Camara, there's always just looking, and there's a cloud of dust in front of him. I'm sure that's distracting, and I think he made a couple of errors on the flying laps, which cost him probably pole. Noel Leon was absolutely rapid as well. That's unfortunate. It's not really his fault. Obviously these things happen and you have to keep your concentration. But conversely, no one else had to deal with that. And in the sprint race, he drove competently, although, I said there's no errors at the moment. obviously going into that first corner, he's locked up and he's run into the back of Inthra and it's taken out 2 drivers. Because all the drivers are so close, it's not because of anything particularly egregious, and he's actually driven a fantastic feature race. As I said, it's just that some of the other drivers outperformed him. That's basically it. And to understand his feature race, just keep listening, especially when you get to the Alex Dunne. And I'm going to go in detail about Alex Dunne and why he gets the rating he gets. And when you hear that, you'll understand why I think Palmer had an excellent race. Don't forget that sort of middle, like 60% of the race, 70% of the race in the middle, where those 4 drivers, the ones that I picked out last week as or like 2 weeks ago as the best performing drivers at the moment, they're all at line of stern. Dunne, Solov, Mini, Karma, all just following each other closely, and the anticipation. And Karma's done nothing wrong this weekend. He's had a very strong weekend, just been outperformed by a couple of other drivers, and his teammate Dirksen gets a 7.5. Qualifying, not so interesting. In the sprint race, he's had a brain fart into turn 1, and that's affected other drivers. But in the feature race, he drove very well. He's been there or thereabouts with Karma, and he's done a fantastic job. Of course, at the end, the tyres fall away. But in terms of his overall pace, very close to his teammate. So 7.5 is in order. And coming to the most disappointing team, again, no prizes for guessing who this was. Ratomo Miata gets a 3 out of 10. The thing about Formula 2, they say that this team is good, that team is good, blah, 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 blah. So I remember 2024, to go from that, where people were saying, oh, the high-tech is a rocket ship, to now they're right at the back. So I don't know what's happening with this team. Absolutely nowhere, and I feel as though somehow the drivers have to have their part in that. Colton Herta gets a 0 out of 10. I'm not trying to exaggerate. I'm not trying to be overly critical because it's Colton Herta. Let's give him none of that stuff. The reason that I give Colton Herta a 0 is simply the way that he mismanaged his tyres and fell through the pack. People are going to say, the high-tech. Yes, but so is the Prema. And Colton Herta was in that breakaway bunch, the alternative strategy runners. Was the 4th in the queue, and he's running right behind someone. I don't even remember who it was. But there's someone, I think Stenson was there. Herta's in the 3rd or 4th place in that queue, and then he just starts sinking like a stone. And to me, that's just a driver that experienced, and I understand experienced in IndyCar. But we've already seen in the opening slew of races that he can manage tyres at this level, and to me that was just so disappointing. Falling behind the AIX, falling behind Mari Boyer in a Aston Martin, the only F2 car that's slower than the Aston Martin F1 car is the one with the Aston Martin livery in F2, and his car's about to break down, explode, and yet he gets passed by Boyer as well. To me, who's struggling in that Prema. That is just so disappointing. And then especially the level of driver that you're driving against and the teams that they're in, he's thoroughly deserved 0, and he's finished last on the road. Nothing to show for this weekend. Coming to Campos, who are one of the best teams, but Noel Leon gets a 7. He's had a fantastic pole lap. Him and his engineer in the qualifying, That was a fantastic idea, and he got 2 points for that. And then in the sprint race and the feature race, so in the sprint race and the feature race, he's been anonymous, but it's decent points still for 7th place, because a lot of the other drivers think John Bennett, they fell back through the pack. Competent job. Plus the pole lap, I think Noel Leon deserves a 7. No incidents. But of course, he was handily outclassed by his teammate Nikola Solov, who gets a 10. He played the race perfectly. He read the race perfectly. He was more attacking, more aggressive, deserved the win. I think the Campos is a slightly better position in the MP and the Rodin, but Campos didn't win here last year, so it's not a given. Sometimes you can't just say, oh, it's the team, because the drivers bring out the best in the best teams as well. Solov, 3rd feature race win. We haven't even reached the halfway point of the season. Yeah, the thing that he just knew the time. Okay, now's the time that I need to overtake Alex Dunne. I'm not going to sit behind him anymore. He picked that moment perfectly, and he went for it. He went for it in such a way that if any of the other driver got past Alex Dunne, they would not be able to catch him up, because they'd have to burn up their tyres to catch up to Solov. That was what was so impressive about it. Sprint race as well, I just remembered that he came back from the back of the field after being hit by Dirksen on the first lap, and ended up with a point because he finished 9th and then Karma got a penalty. So so that's already a show off pace. And then, a la, what is it? Bortoletto, Italy 2024, same thing, coming from the back. In the feature race, he was just unstoppable. Coming to Dams, Dino Bogdanovic gets a 4. People can say what they want about Dams, but I mean, he's been beaten by his teammate. That's what I can say about it. I'm sorry for Dino, because there is a good driver. He did drive in FP1. First medium tyre runs, he was faster than Lewis Hamilton, and then he sort of was sent back to the pit while Lewis Hamilton was sent out again. But in the feature race, he's just sunk with the burnt tyres, and Dams are not on it, but he's been beaten by Belinsky. Roman Belinsky gets a 7 out of 10. Actually, I'll give it a 7.5. Stuff. He's been excellent this week, better than his more experienced teammate, and a bit of a dark horse driver. Flies under the radar, did very well last year in F3 compared to more highly rated teammates, and this year now he's starting to find his groove. He's starting to match Bogdanovic. He's had a dogged drive and he's come away with a point in the feature race, which I think is actually a fantastic result. Because of Stenson's penalty. MP Motorsport, Gabriel Mini gets 9.5. 5th in the sprint, and then in this feature race, okay, as I said, I think some people overplay the importance of the team, but I can't say that MP are quite on the same level as Campos or Invicta, and for him to be holding on to the coattails of drivers in those teams is he's just doing a sensational job at the moment. Flies under the radar. He probably doesn't get the credit he deserves, but doesn't matter. Even F1 is so stupid. When you see him in the post race, he's got that animated personality and talking about the race, and you're like, well, this is the sort of person that be of value to F1, but we have to at least appreciate, as I said, what some of these drivers are doing in F2. Last year was very difficult, and it looked like he wouldn't be coming back, but then he got the gig with MP. I just think he's absolutely maximised the potential of the car, and his teammate Oliver Goethe gets a 10. Goethe is quick over a lap. It's just for him to bring it all together doesn't seem to happen that often for various reasons. Sometimes it's driver error. Sometimes it's reasons out of his control. Sometimes he's a little bit sloppy. And this time he was magnificent. When he came out on those super soft tyres, not only was he rapid, he also had to deal with very tricky situation where other drivers are battling very fiercely over positions on the track. He's handled all of that well. Obviously disappointing in the sprint race, but I think Oliver Goethe drove fantastically well here. The quality of the drivers in F2 has really gone up recently. I can remember like 5-6 years ago, 7 years ago, if you had something like a driver coming out of the pits on super soft tyres, cutting through the pack, there'd be a collision. But now, no, Goethe avoided all the problems, so kudos to him. And then coming to the beleaguered Prema team, Sebastian Montoya gets a 6 out of 10. I know he drove fantastically in the sprint race. Podium well deserved. In the feature race, he's gone 100 metres and the race is over for him. It's very disappointing. You know, the sprint race doesn't get the same amount of points as the feature race, so because he's not featured in the feature race, I can only give him 6 out of 10. His teammate Murray Boyer gets 5 out of 10. I think that's a sympathy vote for how bad that car is. As I said, you know, it's like the Aston Martin F1 car, just it's got the right livery on it, let's say that. And then at Roden, it's a tough one. Firstly, Martinius Stenson, he gets a 5 out of 10. He's had brake problems. Yeah, so I've heard he's had brake problems in the qualifying session and he's qualified last. In the sprint race, he wasn't able to score points. In the feature race, he gambled on a virtual safety car and unfortunately that backfired on him by centimetres and he had his race ruined. I feel as though that the 6th place was kind of slightly disappointing when you consider that he benefited from a virtual safety car and he's still behind Intra Fuvasak and Goethe. You know, I feel like he's a bit of wasted time somewhere, but overall a very tough weekend for Martinius Stenson there. The nightmare. Teammate Alex Dunne, he makes the nightmare for other drivers. He gets a 10 out of 10. I'm deadly serious. People should absolutely appreciate what Alex Dunne did here this weekend, not only in terms of his skill, but in terms of his concept of what's going on. And I'm going to explain it, and this helps to understand Rafael Camara's rating. So in the sprint race, as he's done, he's maximised, or is he 4th? Yes. As those front 3 drivers just got away, he was the best of the rest. In qualifying, he's absolutely maximised the Rodin. Remember back to 2024, right? At Bahrain, what's it, that team, the Rodin, the driver from Barbados. Sorry, I can't remember his name, but he was leading the championship, and then when they hit the European League, he fell off, right? And the same sort of happened with Alex last year. There was Bahrain again, he won the feature race. It's quick as well in Monaco, even though he crashed, he's quick, and he's quick in Imola, and then you hit the main, this part, and it's sort of like the road and struggles to keep up. He's absolutely maximised the car. You have to understand what he's been doing in the feature race. In the eyes of a lot of people, whether it's real or imagined, a lot of people believe that Rafael Camara is the guy going up to Formula One. He's the Behrman Antonelli of 2026, right? You remember in 2024, even if they had a bad weekend, everyone's like, well, they're the F1 prospects, so, you know, we're ignoring this. Whatever they do, they could like, we suspect there's something wrong at the Prema team, which actually turned out to be true. Yeah, Murray Boyer, you know, ask him about Prema. But but the thing is, there's this perception. Even last year with Lindblad, right? This guy is the one destined for Formula One, and Dunne thought, okay, I've got one chance. This guy, you say he's the one. Well, you know for a fact that he's driving the Invicta, which is, right, the cars are equal, but you know this team is a step ahead of the rest. You know I'm driving for a Rodin, and it's a good team, but we're not quite at the level of the Invicta. Okay, and my tyres are going off. Okay, you say this guy's the best. Okay, you see how I handle this guy. You see how I defend with this guy, and he has better machinery than me. He's gone and shown the world, okay, this is what I'm capable of. No matter what people say about the other drivers in F1 or even F2, I don't think other drivers really have that unshakable spirit, but there's something about Alex Dunne. He always comes back, and I think on his worn out old tyres, the car chewing up the tyres. Now, is that down to driver setup? Possibly. Is this because the Rodin is not, the engineers aren't as in tune as the Invicta engineers? That could also be true. One thing's for sure, on those, when his tyres are more burnt up than Kamara's, he's shown that he has all the moves to keep Kamara behind. And it felt very Senna on Prost, you know. It felt very much like, well, I'm in a slower McLaren, you're in a Williams. I'm going to keep you behind as hard as I can. I will fight. He wanted to make a point, and he put a target on Kamara's back, right? And if you watch, there were other drivers there, and he was willing to let them pass. But Kamara, he put a target on his back and saying, I'm marking you out. And I think that's fantastic awareness of perception, of people's perception. And it's also fantastic wheel-to-wheel racing. And I think he highlights the way that most drivers should be racing. And unfortunately, I don't want to get too political here and socio-political, but unfortunately, I feel as though in this day and age, we don't appreciate that enough. Someone with fight and vigour, and this guy has it. He's willing to take that risk. He's willing to take the fight to the bigger dog, and I can't praise him enough, if I'm being honest. That sort of hard wheel-to-wheel racing. Look, they didn't crash. They didn't end up in the gravel trap. And you could say, well, that's because Kamara avoided him, yes, but still, he could still have done that to Kamara. And that wheel-to-wheel battle is that ferociousness. That's what racing is supposed to be. I feel as though he exposes not only a lot of other drivers in F2, but also in F1 who don't bring enough fire to the table. And I think that's what this sport really needs. And it's fantastic to see it in Formula 2, and I appreciate it. I appreciate, Gabriele Mini doing the 100% every weekend so far. I appreciate Alex Dunne. I appreciate he has the insight to understand people's perceptions of the F2 field, and who he may not be racing Kamara for the title, but he's racing for the perception that this driver is better than the others, and he wants to challenge that. And that's very rare, and the other drivers should adopt that, actually, because Kamara has been given, and Lindblad last year, though Lindblad wasn't in the title fight, and other drivers before. You know how it is. Some of these drivers have sort of been given even before the season starts, they've been given this, well, he's the guy. Alex Dunne stood up and he's challenging that. He's saying, well, this guy, you see what I can do to this guy. Fantastic. So 10 out of 10. So coming to ART, their form is definitely a lot better this year, but Kush Miney had a forgettable weekend. Nothing majorly impressive from him. A decent result in the sprint race, but in the feature race he's been not making any ground and finishing out of the points, but he gets a 5 out of 10. And Tazana Bolin for Fuvazak gets a 7, and he could get a 7.5. So he gets a 7.5. No, make it a 7. No, none of this 7.5 because qualifying's great. Sprint race getting taken out, not his fault. In the feature race, 5th is a fantastic result, but he should have had 4th. He had all the tyres and the energy to take 4th place, and his fight was not there. That's how it stands with Intrafuvazak, but I think it's a fantastic weekend for him, and it could be a chance for him to show that he deserves a second season in F2. And Emerson Fittipaldi Jr. gets a 5 out of 10 because AIX were nowhere this weekend. His teammate Keen Shields gets a 4 out of 10, mainly because of those lockups in qualifying and just generally being behind his teammate a little bit, even though he's a bit more experienced at this level. Nico Verone gets a 4 out of 10. Very anonymous. That's another driver that was battling with Colton Herter. Yeah, he was on the alternative strategy, and some of the other drivers were able to make it work. He didn't. Rafael Villagomez gets a 6 out of 10. Fantastic qualifying. Fantastic sprint race podium. Thoroughly deserved. He should be further up in the driver's standings, but he's not. He brings something to the table, but the feature race, he can't quite hold on to the tyres, and he sinks back out of the points. Lawrence Van Hoopen of Trident gets a 6.5. He was qualifying is very disappointing to be out-qualified by John Bennett by so many positions. In the sprint race, there's nothing to write home about, but in the feature race, he's made the alternative strategy work. He's gone from a fairly lowly position into some points. It's not a lot of points, but he's made it work. He's had to overtake cars on track. So, quality race from Lawrence Van Hoopen. And finally, John Bennett, so he gets an 8 out of 10. He finally gets that win. He got a sprint race win. Fantastic podium. Fantastic overtake on Sebastian Montoya on the last lap. Fabulous last lap overtake to take the win. Yeah, and it was fantastic how Villagomez, Montoya and Bennett just drove away from the pack, the chasing pack. Alex Dunne, Rafa Kamara, those guys in the distance. See you later. Fantastic work. Made the tyres last, and he's held on for a last lap overtake to take the win. And feature race is a bit disappointing. Qualifying's great, but he's sunk through the field, struggling to hold on to the tyres. Well, I kind of want to leave it there, but there's just a couple of little things I want to talk about. We're going to have Silverstone coming up very quickly, so we'll talk about the championship picture after that when we have a week's break. I think it's a very stacked grid, at least. At least the top third, there's 22, so there's 7 drivers at least that are really, really good, and there's a couple of others that are on the borderline, like Goethe, for example, is actually really quick over a lap. It's just, he's, well, about Goethe, and then he's rhyming partner Herta is. I think he's essentially a much better driver than what we saw this weekend. I could be a little bit hard on him because of high tech, but he's still a long way behind Miata. Didn't make the. Yeah, I was just very disappointed with him, especially you're being beaten by, some of the drivers. Mario Boyes can be quite a good driver. Sebastian Montoya, Dirksen, yeah, can be, but sometimes he's had a lot of incidents. So if he takes the incidents away, hopefully we can see the Dirksen that we saw in the second half of 2024. Miney's not bad. Lawrence Van Hoopen, I think, there's more to come from him, and I think a driver that we have a lot more to come from is Nico Varone. Roman Belinsky is quietly impressive. There's very few drivers here. Maybe, well, I'm not even going to put a number on it, who I don't think has some sort of worth. I don't think you can compare, Boyer or Verone or Belinsky or Bennett or Interfuvazak. They do not equate with the likes of Raghunathan and Daleda. And, if you go back to that era, there's so many drivers that, even in the midfield, they're disappointing. But these drivers are a fairly high standard, and the ones near the top are really showing their quality this year. I think the big question mark is Gabriele Mini, and MP Motorsport, how are they going to keep going? Obviously, Kamara can turn it around. Solov can 3 feature race wins plus a sprint race win plus, this guy is going great guns. Alex Dunne, you never know what to expect from Alex Dunne, but he's actually having a very good season. I don't know about Bogdanovic and Stenson Air falling off a little bit recently. But, I think it's just as I said, let's wait and see what happens after Silverstone. It's possible we'll have a new championship leader. And again, no prizes for guessing who that is. Just want to talk about FP1. As I said, Dino Bogdanovic went faster than Lewis Hamilton on the first medium tyre run. He ended up a fair bit slower than Hamilton, but he got a lot less track time. Paul Aron, he was very quick in Barcelona. If I'm being honest, I feel as though it wasn't a good look for the two main drivers. For whatever reason, this weekend he wasn't that fast. You never know what plans the drivers are doing. It was, they're on heavy fuel loads, whatever. Has the engine turned all the way up or not? But anyway, Jack Crawford went faster than Fernando Alonso on the hard tyre run, and then again on the soft tyre run, only by a tenth. But it's Fernando Alonso, the main driver, so I think it's when you can, as I said, when you consider Fernando Alonso's in that car all the time, and Jack Crawford gets very little time in the car, and the experience level, I think that's a fantastic job from Jack Crawford. Definitely worth talking about. Hopefully we get to see him in more FP1s, and Silverstone's coming up, and that's going to be a fantastic weekend of racing again. F2, F3, I'd love to see a bit of rain, not too much rain that we get the red flags. Please, no red flags. I don't want to see crash safety car, but I want to see a bit of light rain and drivers going around in the rain. I'd love to see that. F2 in the rain is fantastic. So hopefully, and even if not, Silverstone is such a great track. You need great tracks, and great tracks produce great racing.